Brooke Logan's mansion, where a ceremony was about to take place. The town's much-anticipated wedding, the seemingly perfect reunion of Hope Logan and Liam Spencer. Every detail was arranged so perfectly that it was almost too perfect, as if someone were trying to prove that after all the storms, these two people deserved a final peace. But at Forrester Creations, peace was never real, and smiles always carried the smell of knives. On the rooftop, white curtains fluttered in the wind. Hope stood still, looking down at the garden being decorated, dozens of staff running back and forth, bouquets of roses arranged in the shape of hearts, but there was still an indescribable chill in her heart. Something in the light today made her uneasy. Liam, in the next room, tightened his tie, his eyes on the small photo on the table, a smiling Beth holding a little white dress. He told himself this would be a happy day, a day to fix everything that was broken, a day to end all the doubts that had haunted Hope all this time. But deep inside, there was still a void, a faint echo of the mistakes he couldn't erase. Outside, Sheila Carter watched in the car mirror, her eyes reflecting the sharp light of metal. She had told Deacon she would go with him, that as the bride's father's wife, she had every right to be there. But Deacon knew better than anyone that every time Sheila walked into a ceremony, happiness was buried under a layer of ash. He had tried to convince her to stay home, but Sheila never stayed home when there was something to prove her power. She looked at the invitation without her name, her finger lightly tracing the words Hope and Liam forever, and smiled. There was no invitation, but every door could be opened with a well-timed push. Meanwhile, upstairs, Brooke was busy getting everything set up. Ridge and Steffi were discussing by the window how the wedding would boost hope for the future. They both knew that every moment, every photo, every dress today could become a media tool, and a scandal would kill the entire campaign. So they put their trust in Hope, but Steffi still had a wary look in her eyes. She knew all too well that anything involving Logan could blow up. Steffi remembered losing Liam, the bitterness and relief of letting go, and now standing here, being asked by Hope to be maid of honor, she felt a mixture of relief and unease. Their budding friendship was like thin glass, beautiful but capable of shattering with just a wrong breath. At home, Thomas Forrester looked at an old photo of Hope, his hand clenched until it bled. He had left Los Angeles, seeking solace in Paris, but news of the wedding cut through the thin ice of oblivion. There was still love, obsession, and the feeling that Hope was making a mistake again. Thomas knew he wasn't invited, but that never stopped him. Because love, in his world, was always reason enough to destroy everything. Back at Forrester, Deke Sharp stood in the dressing room, adjusting the collar of his suit jacket, the light glinting off the cufflinks Remy had given him. He hadn't told anyone Remy was coming. Remy had begged to come along, saying he wanted to stay away, just to witness the happiness of people who used to be his friends, but Deke understood. Remy never stood still. He carried chaos like a poisonous gift. Deke, however, was too weak to refuse. And so, while Steffi tried to make sure the wedding went smoothly, Sheila quietly prepared her shiny black dress. Thomas took an emergency flight back to Los Angeles, and Remy stood on the sidelines, waiting for the moment to come back like a storm. The afternoon was fading, the music was playing, the guest seats were sparkling in the sunlight. Douglas Forrester appeared from behind the garden gate, his face radiant, bringing tears to Hope's eyes. He ran to hug her, and in that moment, all the painful memories seemed to disappear. Steffi stood behind, watching the scene, her eyes shining with a mixture of emotion and anticipation. It was all like a dream, and even in the best dreams, nightmares always find a way to creep in. Deacon took his daughter's hand and led Hope towards Liam. Everyone held their breath. The light dimmed. But in the back row, a figure appeared. Black dress, blood-red lips, cold eyes. Sheila stepped into the middle of the ceremony, like an ink stain on a white sheet. Whispers spread like wildfire. Deacon paled, Hope was stunned. Liam took a half step back. But Sheila just smiled, the smile of someone who knew she had won even before anyone knew where the battle had begun. And as if fate weren't cruel enough, a distant sound rang out. A car door slammed shut, and Thomas Forrester stepped out, his eyes fierce. He marched into the garden, his heart beating faster with each step. Everyone turned. Steffi held her breath. Ridge squeezed Brooke's hand. Time seemed to stand still. Thomas stopped at the gate, looking at Hope with a mixture of love, anger, and pain. But instead of screaming, instead of stopping, he just stood still, letting his presence do the talking. And then, the wind picked up, blowing the white curtain that covered the flower column behind him. In that moment, someone noticed Remy standing in the farthest row of trees, half hidden, half visible, his eyes watching Deke. So much of the past was crammed into one frame of the present, and everyone had a secret. When Hope held Liam's hand, she could feel his breath, but behind the bright light, darkness awaited. Sheila took a step forward. Deacon stepped forward. Thomas grabbed her arm. Steffi froze, and Remy started to walk in. The music stopped. A moment of silence that felt like a century. Then, like a crack in a perfect surface, came a cacophony of sounds, screams, glasses crashing, the wind blowing white petals. In that chaotic moment, Hope turned, and in the midst of the panic, she saw Sheila's head raised, her eyes reflecting the swaying candlelight, and Thomas clutching the old photograph, which fell to the wet ground. It was like a painting about to be torn apart. The final question rang in Hope's mind like a cold bell in the chaos. Is happiness really defined by the two words, I do, or is it just a brief moment of peace before love turns to ash again? Remy stood before the mirror, his trembling hand on his chest, where his heart was beating faster than ever. Part of him wanted to leave, to disappear from this city, from all the people who had believed in him and hated him. But the other part, the darker, more ambitious part, wouldn't let him go. Deke was the last person who believed in him, the last piece that held him to the decent man he had once been. And Remy knew that if he lost Deke, he would lose himself. Outside in the hallway, the rapid tapping of the staff's shoes echoed, reflecting the frantic pace of the fashion world where one small mistake could end a career. Remy took a deep breath, remembering the promise he had made to Deke, that he wouldn't mention his name in Forrester, that he would stay behind the scenes, watching from the shadows. But now that Deke had stepped into the spotlight, the shadow began to feel heavy, suffocating. The more he tried to hide Remy, the more dangerous a secret he became, one that Deke couldn't protect forever. In the next room, Deke sat alone, his hands clasped together, his eyes staring blankly at the unsketched white canvas. Every imagined line brought back Remy, the smiles, the lies. He believed in the man, thought love could change a soul that had faked, lied, and destroyed. But when the truth came out, Deke lost more than just his lover. He lost faith in himself. Ridge walked in, the gait of a man accustomed to power. He looked at Deke, his eyes a mixture of sympathy and calculation. He knew Deke's talent, knew Hope for the future needed him, but Forrester would never tolerate scandal. And Remy, with his past, was a stain no collection could hide. Upstairs, Steffi watched through the glass door, her hair tied back, her face carved in marble. She loved Hope for the future, but she loved the safety of the brand more. She knew the decision had to be made, cold, decisive, and without emotion. Steffi had seen weaklings drowned by compassion, and she swore she wouldn't be. Ridge and Steffi discussed it for hours, weighing every consequence, every rumor that might arise. They knew Remy couldn't be left alone, that one photo, one revelation, and all of Forrester Creations would go down with him. They couldn't let that happen. And so, a silent ultimatum was written. Deke could keep working, but Remy had to go. Deke heard the news, his heart clenched. He knew Steffi was right. The company, his reputation, everything he dreamed of, depended on this choice. But he also knew that in the moment he signed the new contract, he was killing a part of himself. Out there, Remy still believes he can save everything. He met Deke, bearing a small gift, a thin silver ring, a symbol of a new beginning. But instead of loving eyes, he only saw silence. Deke said nothing, just placed a blank piece of paper on the table, a termination notice. Remy smiled, the twisted smile of someone who once believed that love could redeem sins. When Deke left, Remy stood still, and for the first time, he felt truly empty. Meanwhile, Electra, who had been a victim of Remy's madness, was facing another devastating news. Luna Nozawa, Will's attacker, was pregnant in prison. The pregnancy was like a time bomb, not only breaking the fragile peace between Electra and Will, but also bringing back all the dark memories they had buried. Electra knew Deke was a good person, but now every time she saw him, she remembered Remy. Remembered the eyes, the lies, the long nights running away from the nightmare called love. She thought she had moved on, had escaped the cycle of guilt, but Remy returned like a spirit that refused to leave. A part of her heart still trembled, not with fear, but with anger. Angry at herself for still reacting to that name. Will tried to reassure her, tried to rebuild her faith, but every time Luna appeared on the news, every time Remy was mentioned, Electra felt her world crumble around her. At Forrester, Hope was showing her new collection. The audience was in awe, but backstage, Steffi was still watching Deke with a cold gaze. She saw him stumble, saw his hands tremble as he touched the fabric, saw the obsession in his eyes. She knew that a man with such a burden would soon collapse, and that, to her, was a danger that needed to be eliminated before it spread. When the curtain closed, all the lights dimmed, Remy was still standing in the long hallway, looking inside through the glass. He saw Deke smile wryly, saw Steffi shaking his hand in congratulations, saw the world he once belonged in no longer have a place for him. A drop of water fell from the ceiling to the floor, merging with his shadow, creating a dark blur. In that moment, he knew he had become an outsider to every story, a forgotten man. But people like Remy don't know how to accept being forgotten. He turned away, his eyes suddenly different, no longer weak, but calculating. Inside, Steffi and Ridge were celebrating their decision, believing they had everything under control. Unbeknownst to them, Remy was walking out of the building with a cold smile. Every game has a hidden master, and Remy had just chosen him. He wouldn't break it with anger, but with silence. One leak, one message, one secret exposed, and Forrester Creations would be shaken. At the same moment, Electra stood on the balcony, looking down at the city lights, her heart heavy as lead. The wind blew through her hair, carrying with it the chill of unspoken truths. Deep down, she knew it wasn't over. Remy wasn't the type to disappear. She sensed him, not with her eyes, but with her senses. A strange